Welcome to Career Tipper Podcast, hosted by Michelle Beatty. The Career Tipper Podcast is a motivational resource that shares career and entrepreneurial tips by industry experts that will help amazing people evolve to their professional best. And now your host, Michelle Beatty.
Episode 7 of the Career Tipper Podcast features Susan Clarine, the founder and CEO of the EI Coach. As an emotional intelligence coach, she's committed to helping managers and teams gain insight into how their emotions affect their work, relationships, and results. By learning and applying the principles of emotional intelligence, managers and teams increase engagement, build trusting relationships, make better decisions, and lead change with positive energy. I'm your host, Michelle Beatty, career confidence author and coach. Susan, welcome to the Career Tipper Podcast.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm so happy to be here, and a big hello to all the Career Tipper Podcast listeners. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, thank you. This is going to be awesome. So I just want to jump right in. I just want to find out, what was your path to becoming an emotional intelligence coach?
Thanks for the question. And it's interesting. I've been in leadership development, talent development, and coaching for about 18 years now. But going back a little bit further, I actually was an actress for many years. And I got my master's in theater and thought, I was just going to be the next big thing. And reflecting on it, I think that was probably some early training in emotional intelligence, because being in acting and theater is really all about connection and listening. And then as I progressed in my career through leadership development and talent development, I got into coaching, specifically managers and teams, around 8 years ago. And what I found is, once I really discovered emotional intelligence, it really made a difference when I was coaching people, because ultimately, even when someone really wants to change, it can be really hard because we have these mental habits. And to really shift those habits and shift those perceptions, we really have to dig a little bit deeper into some insight around how are we seeing ourselves, how are we seeing other people. And so about 4 years ago, I really started studying a lot more about emotional intelligence and then became certified. And for me, I felt like it made such a difference in the leaders and teams that I was coaching to really help them dig deep into why they were doing some of the things they were doing. So going beyond just, oh gosh, I have some goals I want to achieve, or I want to become more effective, into really understanding the thoughts and the perceptions that were driving their behavior. So that's what led me to that.
I love it. So why is emotional intelligence a huge focus in the workplace, like from a corporate perspective and an entrepreneurial perspective? Like, it's like a buzzword, but something within me feels that it shouldn't be treated as a buzzword. Like, this is becoming a core foundational, pillar in the workplace.
Well, that's really perceptive of you, Michelle, because I think there's a lot of misconception around what emotional intelligence really is. And so sometimes people will say, oh, that's all that soft stuff. And if I could help folks understand anything, it's that soft stuff actually gives us hard results. And by that, I mean it's about the quality of our relationships, how our teams perform, our goal achievement, how we make decisions, how we solve problems. So it's understanding and managing our emotions, because if we don't understand and manage our emotions, then our emotions manage us. And even if we think we're not at the cause of our emotions throughout the day, I would just invite your listeners just to, kind of think tomorrow as they go through their day, what are those things that trigger them? Is it an email? Is it getting stuck in traffic? Is it going into a meeting and they think, oh my gosh, not another meeting, this is killing me, right? Conflict with another colleague. If they're a manager and they're trying to coach and develop someone, if they're trying to lead change, all of these things foundationally are driven by our perceptions, and those perceptions are shaped by our emotions. So that's a key thing. I think another key thing is around understanding that it is more than a buzzword, as you said. It's really scientific, right? So we're all humans. There was an article recently I saw around, why do people forget they're a human when they become a manager? And ultimately, it's evolutionary, right? So we understand a lot more now about how our brains function, how we function under stress. And emotional intelligence really goes into just the physiology of how we are when we're reacting and responding to different situations. And that actually impacts then how we see ourselves and then how we build those relationships. And another key thing, and this is for both, whether you're working in corporate or whether you're working for yourself or you're an entrepreneur, you're a freelancer, empathy. And empathy is very foundational to effective working relationships anymore. And by empathy, it means more than just sympathizing, right? So it's more than just, again, having what some people call those soft skills, that they think it's all just mushy stuff. And it's not. Empathy is really around communicating, I get you. I understand you. Doesn't necessarily mean you agree with the person, but it gives you that foundation to connect, which empathy is at the heart of trust. It's at the heart of authenticity. It's at the heart of effective team relationships and good communication. And companies, whether, again, you're working for yourself or you're working for someone else, it's pressure, it's change, it's fast-paced, and to have a good understanding of empathy for one another, even being compassionate towards yourself and your own personal well-being is really key to having success in business and the workplace.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that when you were sharing, it's the mushy stuff and you actually clarifying it to be empathy, I agree with you. I think that is a huge connector for managers and their team, whether they agree with an opinion or not. When you're leading change and you're being held accountable for certain metrics, you have to make every effort to connect with your team and have them believe in you, right? At the same time, they want to know that they're heard. So that can be accomplished through empathy.
Yes, Michelle, and there's a big authenticity component behind that empathy. So authenticity is something else that we hear a lot about now because it's so important for people to be transparent and real and authentic in order to be transformational, in order to really lead themselves and others. And whether you're an extroverted kind of person or whether you're an introverted kind of person, everyone can experience and practice empathy. And it's something that we can get better at. So it's not just something either you're good at it or you're not good at. Emotional intelligence is something that once you start to develop those insights around how those emotions are affecting you, your judgments, your perceptions, your decisions, you can make choices that you can be then more effective in your role and on the team.
Now, what about those people that have a challenge? It's a work in progress for them to be transparent. Mm-hmm. Like being transparent, what are your suggestions to help them? Because I interact with different people and sometimes transparency is a big challenge, and you can see it not only in the workplace, but different content creators on social media. Sometimes people have a challenge of being transparent, but like you're saying, they need to show authenticity as well. What are some of your thoughts on that?
So that's a great question. And from an emotional intelligence view, what I would really be curious about is that person's level of independence. So do they trust themselves? Do they trust their own judgments? Are they confident? And do they have that confidence to express opinions and views and do that in an authentic manner? And some people are more internal processors and some people are more external. That's okay. But I think if people are struggling to find that authenticity, usually there's something deeper going on where they feel that they don't have the ability or the confidence to exercise some assertiveness. So from an emotional intelligence perspective, what we would look at is those competencies or those skills around what we call self-actualization, right? So being your full self and actualizing and achieving all that you want to achieve, and your independence and your level of confidence. And you can improve, right? So then that's something as you start to think about that, you can just even ask yourself questions around, why am I hesitating? What's at risk? Why do I perceive that risk to be that risk? And even asking yourself, how true is it? How true is my perception around this? And can I even just take one small step, doesn't have to be huge, but one small step toward being more authentic, whatever that might look like. So maybe that's speaking up in a meeting. Maybe that's addressing a colleague or a manager or a peer, or if you're a blogger, if you're an independent person, maybe that's stepping out a little bit. And it doesn't have to be huge. You can take little achievable steps. What would be a 10% difference, that you could make? And that's something that people can even do on their own.
That's a great share. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Now I want to go back a little bit, and I want to identify the basics that managers need to keep in mind when they're assessing emotional intelligence with their team.
Yes, great question. I think there's really kind of three key areas, and the first area is around this idea that emotions are contagious. It's like if you catch a cold, right, from somebody, you're like, wash your hands, I need to Purell. Studies actually show this. In fact, there's a psychologist from the University of Hawaii. Her name is Elaine Hatfield, and she did this study back in 2008. And what she found is in a social group, if you have a friend, like a nearby friend in your social group, who's really happy, that person can impact the happiness of their social circle by 25% in a positive direction. And then there have been other studies to show this plays out at work as well. So, and we've all seen this, we sort of know it, we just don't know, this is emotional intelligence at work. So we can think about the chronic complainer, right? Or the chronic venter, or all the water cooler talk, where those emotions that can be a little more destructive, right, and ineffective can really take hold. That's because you catch it. You catch that emotion from someone else. So it's important for leaders to recognize that their emotional state, what they're projecting, and what's being perceived can really impact the team. And for the team to understand that the team emotions and the team dynamic can really impact one another. I think the other thing is going back to that empathy that we talked about before is fundamental to all quality relationships. So if you want to have good conflict on a team, healthy conflict, debate, we're able to innovate, to challenge ideas, to come up with good solutions. People need to feel safe. To feel safe, they need to be able to trust. And to trust, there needs to be understanding, and understanding is founded on empathy. So empathy is really foundational to all of that. And then 3, I'd say lack of employee engagement. So that's something else I know teams look at a lot, managers look at a lot. But if your team is suffering from a lack of engagement, all things being equal, if pay is not like a big issue and a big disparity, other things, pretty much everything comes down to issues around emotional intelligence. So how are people perceiving their environment? How are they being communicated to? Do they feel the environment is motivating? And again, there's emotional intelligence has been around for like 25 years, so there's so much research behind it to validate it. And again, we can see that emotional intelligence can impact an employee's happiness on the job by up to 52%. And of that 52%, they show that job satisfaction is dependent upon the manager's level of emotional intelligence with the team. And by that, what we really are talking about here is their ability to coach, right? Their ability to inspire, to innovate, to lead authentically and have the team connect in with those same qualities. So I think those things kind of really cover it around understanding that we catch these emotions, empathy is fundamental, and it's really foundational to employee engagement.
I agree. Now, managers are often seen or viewed as leaders in the workplace. So from your perspective, how can leaders develop themselves, to become emotionally smart leaders?
Mm-hmm.
That's key.
It is key. And because they're the role model, right? Yes. So, and they are often the ones, and I work with everyone, but I enjoy most working with middle-level managers, with teams, directors, people who are managing up, people who are managing across, people who are managing down, and teams, these cross-functional teams, because to me, that's where the heart of everything that happens in an organization. And where leaders are really so key is they kind of get hit first, right? With change, with fires that they have to put out, with constantly shifting priorities, and how they respond and react to that, and how that stress either shows up or doesn't show up is going to affect the rest of the team and how they're responding to all of that.
True.
So, at a most basic level, it's around first being open-minded. And so if a manager says, and I sometimes, meet people like this, again, who say, oh, emotional intelligence, that's not for me. That's all that soft, squishy stuff. That's kind of too bad, because you have to have that open mind to say, you know what, I'm human, and as a human, I have perceptions, I have judgments, and how's what I'm experiencing and the stress I'm experiencing impacting how I lead, how I make decisions. So even at the most basic level, just being open-minded, and then starting to become aware throughout the day of what derails your focus. So Daniel Goleman, who's a leading author in emotional intelligence, he wrote a book a couple of years ago called Focus. And it's really about how do we focus attention so we're not getting derailed and our attention and our focus is not going off onto those things that are causing stress or anxiety or just all the fires that we're putting out through the day. And so something is just to start noting for yourself, when am I becoming derailed, my focus becoming derailed? And that's an exercise, that's something you don't need a fancy assessment, or, great coach like me, that's something people can do on their own. And then even just starting to, note down at the end of the day, what really took my focus? What was I thinking when my focus was derailed? And becoming aware of any emotional heightening that's calling their attention. Our brain likes attention. Our brain likes It focuses on emotional components. So if you're in a meeting, for an example, let's say if you're in a meeting and there's this beautiful PowerPoint with all of this data and details and spreadsheets and numbers, right? Yeah, Michelle, you're shaking your head. You might remember like 10% of that. But if there's an emotional connection to that, our brain pays attention. Our brain pays attention to, hey, this is a huge opportunity for a company. This is exciting. This is going to take us into the future. Or this is a crisis. We need all hands on deck. Whatever that emotional trigger is, that's what draws our attention. That's when our brain actually literally starts to release dopamine and cortisol. And when we focus on that, it's almost like a little mental Post-it note. And so a leader can start to become aware of, when am I having those emotional Post-it notes? And what am I thinking about? What's triggering that? And what's a better response? So that's some things just that people can do for themselves to start to learn more about emotional intelligence. They could read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, because that's such a great foundational piece to perception and understanding our paradigms and what impacts that. signing up for some free newsletters. So harvardbusinessreview.org, hbr.org. You can sign up for free newsletters and filter by emotional intelligence. Forbes online, Inc. magazine online, Huffington Post. These are great resources just to go to. Sign up for their newsletters and say you have a special interest in emotional intelligence and get some quick hits into your inbox. And then following coaches like me, right?
Yes.
So online. So following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, other coaches like myself who specialize in the area of emotional intelligence, just to start to become aware and get these little tidbits and start to think about how that applies to you.
So it's about being intentional. Mm-hmm. Is there from your experience of working with different companies and individuals and managers, like you said, like you work in a playground of various corporate environments, managing up, managing down. Do you see is there a measurement that you've seen where you see the gap close, where they have the aha moment and everything starts to tick?
That is a really interesting question. I think when I see it as a two-parter.
Okay.
And by that I mean a 360-degree assessment, and emotional intelligence 360-degree assessment is great for starting to develop the insight. So we can have self-awareness, right? We can say, oh gosh, I'm strong in this area and I kind of need to work in this area. And a 360 can validate some things for us. And then if you work with a coach, you can start to develop some insight around that. Well, what does that actually mean in terms of how I'm working with my team? That's the first step. Mm-hmm. Where I see the second step, where I really see magic happen, is when then there's a follow-up and a connection in with the team. So some kind of a team offsite, a team development experience, whether it's emotional intelligence, whether it's some other kind of an assessment-based experience. Some things I've used in the past are strength finders, or Peter Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Or there's a team emotional intelligence survey that I use. It's called a TESI, Team Emotional and Social Inventory. We talked about Myers-Briggs or something like a Forte communication styles. That's when I see it start to gel. And instead of it just becoming one person or one leader focusing on trying to make those changes, it becomes this collective and unifying experience. And that's when I see it then it just starts to happen on the ground. Then you start to see the empathy, the understanding, the communication, the aha moments between people happening in that experience in the room. Does that answer the question? As I was thinking about that.
You did. And be patient with the process of it all unfolding, be connected to your self-awareness at the same time, not sensitive, but you're saying be empathetic to your team and how they respond to you and leave room for that, to process that. Sometimes I think you might enter a project or a role and you might think it only takes 6 months, but it might actually take 9 months to 12 months. And it's okay because you have to understand the time for change to happen.
Very well said. It's about evolving, right? So it's about development. And if you're someone who is open to developing and constantly growing, you're going to keep coming back to it. So it's not like, oh, I get this emotional intelligence report or this 360 or this self-assessment or a team assessment and we're all done now. It's information. And then you evolve through that process. And then through that evolution, hopefully you find purpose, you find connection, you have better stress management, you have increased well-being, all those things start to unfold. And as you said, it takes patience and over time.
Yes, it does. Now, how does one's core value affect their emotional intelligence?
Yes. Well, how we practice our values really drives, again, how we see our world, our paradigms. And there the question is what are my values? And do I walk the talk with those values at work? And how are those values impacting and shaping my perception of myself and other people? How are those values impacting how judgmental I am, right? How are those values impacting my expectations of someone else? So if I'm someone who highly values getting results and drive and goal achievement and responsiveness, as an example, someone else values care and accuracy. Maybe I want something right away. They're taking their time because they want to make sure it's right. This is kind of an example. So I think, again, understanding our own values, understanding, even just rating ourselves, like on a scale of 1 to 10, if my values are happiness and loyalty and integrity and collaboration and creativity, just kind of off the top of my head, on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I practicing those at work? And what's getting in the way of that? And that's even if I'm working for myself, right? If I'm even managing my own business. I think another area where values really come into play is around generational differences. And because in a broad way, different generations tend to have different values. I'm kind of painting with a broad brush here. But again, it goes to expectation. And millennials, by and large, they value purpose at work. They value purpose. They value coaching and development. They value feedback. They value strengths. It's really not so much about having the title, right, or even a big salary. It's about finding meaning and purpose at work. And it's understanding that if a millennial is your boss or your colleague or your direct report, and you're of a different generation and maybe you have somewhat different values, we can all kind of get on board with those things, but maybe you value security or maybe you do value having a certain position, whatever that might be. That, again, can also start to impact perception, and it can impact, am I seen as someone who is empathetic? Am I seen as someone who can build strong interpersonal relationships? How are those values and those biases I have impacting my decisions? All of that falls under the realm of emotional intelligence.
It does. It does. Now, Susan, throughout this interview, you have shared some great nuggets, like resource information. Are there any additional tools and resources that you suggest professionals use, as a way to manage emotional intelligence within themselves and their teams?
Sure. So I would recommend certainly working with a certified coach because it's important. Sometimes people have a bad experience with emotional intelligence because they're not working with somebody who is really certified in the assessments. And it's important to use a validated, scientifically based assessment. I think so you're really understanding your own self-awareness and what's happening within that. And so an example could be an EQI self-assessment or 360 assessment, the ESCI, the TESI, so the self-assessments or the team assessments. And then there's just some good books out there. So I mentioned Daniel Goleman as an author in his book Focus, and he has some great books all around emotional intelligence. And another really good one is Emotional Agility by Susan Hughes. Okay. And that's a great one because she talks about emotional intelligence at work and at home and with children. So it's kind of a more broad, holistic view of emotional intelligence. And there's another really great book, kind of pulled it out here, which isn't an emotional intelligence book, but it talks about understanding how our brains function and all the physiology behind our emotions. And that's Brain Rules by John Medina. And that's a really great book. It's a simple read. It's really interesting just about understanding our brains and how they function.
That's important. It's important to understand. I'm really intrigued by all of that, how your brain, other than the functionality of it, but what triggers your brain to respond to certain things, like you were saying, like reading the memo, and certain things just triggers you to, it's like a mental memo of what that is, if it's something you're responsible for, or that it affects your team in a certain way, and how you want to, quote unquote, provide a covering, like shield them, how you're going to disseminate the information to them. I'm always intrigued by that. So thank you for those shares, because I will definitely be checking some of them out.
And another good place for your listeners to go, also on the Harvard Business Review site, is they do have videos. So they have videos that you can watch on a lot of different topics, including emotional intelligence. So that's a great one. And then kind of picking up too on what you said about, understanding our brains and our functioning. It's understanding, brains like patterns. Brains like patterns, brains like habit, and they create those neural pathways. And again, it's just around increasing our self-awareness around, that's my brain going down that neural pathway that it really likes. And either that's working for me or it's not working for me. And then what do I want to do about that?
Indeed. Okay, Susan, so how does emotional intelligence play a role in a company's culture and its future success?
A big piece. In fact, I was just watching 60 Minutes this last weekend, and the current CEO of Microsoft was talking about empathy when it comes to where they're going strategically in the future. And it was all around empathy for their customers. And so it can play a big impact on the culture of a company. It impacts hiring, right? So our biases that we have when we're interviewing people and how we make those hiring decisions. It can impact succession planning, right? When we start to think about roles people play, emerging women leaders, women in the workplace, and sometimes, again, painting with a broad brush here, but sometimes women can struggle around issues of confidence, authenticity, assertiveness, independence. Those are all areas and opportunities for coaching emerging women leaders. That impacts future talent, diversity, and again, certainly it gets into engagement and performance. So, all companies are faced with quick change, doing more with less. And to do that, you need employees who are committed, who are engaged, and who are motivated. And that all falls within the realm of emotional intelligence.
How does emotional intelligence impact professional development? Because professional development is becoming, I feel it's looping back around in the workplace to becoming a focus area again. How do you perceive that emotional intelligence impacts professional development?
Well, I believe in strengths-based development. And so really understanding, it's just another view of what are my strengths. When we're looking at what are those qualities I have around coaching, around connecting with others, around developing relationships, around how I work with my team. And it's really taking a strengths-based approach. And I do the same with emotional intelligence. If I'm working with a leader, it's sure, let's look at maybe where there's some gaps in perception, but what are their strengths? And how can we really more actively activate and use those strengths to be more effective, to build their career and build themselves professionally?
How is the success in the workplace dictated by emotional intelligence?
So I think that goes to, again, just being aware of the judgments and the biases and the decisions we make throughout the day, and how those are being driven by judgments that we have that are really coming from a place of an emotional reaction or emotional response. And being aware of how stress, because so many people tell me they're dealing with stress, limited time, a lot of issues around time management, understanding our emotional responses and connections to time, and just how that can affect our day-to-day and how we engage with other people, and then how we are managing ourselves. So it really kind of goes back to your first question of emotional intelligence is really about understanding and managing my emotions and understanding and managing the emotions of others, right? So I can have influence, so I can be more effective, and then ultimately goes into well-being. And well-being is a huge component around emotional intelligence. That we're feeling healthy, we're feeling happy, we're finding purpose, and that's a very important. The well-being component and just the health component and the mindfulness component is very important in just having success every day on the job.
Judgment and bias. My ears perked up when you said that, because sometimes a manager or a leader might not realize they're demonstrating judgment that's not beneficial. It's based off their own bias. How do you feel people can shift, I don't know if it's categorize, but really identify what judgment is deemed applicable and what bias is deemed applicable for the situation that they're dealing at hand?
First, it's a very natural reaction, especially for managers, because it's all about being effective and efficient. That's what ultimately they want to do, right?
Right.
And so it's going to rely on their experience. They're going to say, oh, I've been here before, I've seen this before, so here's how I'm going to respond. And that, again, it's an awareness to recognize, is that helping the situation or is it a default? And that's where it's so important to have strong relationships with the team, and also recognize leaders can't do it all themselves anymore. There's just too much going on. There's too much with change. There's too much with technology. There's too much with new products, new innovation, new services. There's too much going on if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a freelancer, and all that you have to manage. And it's just recognizing that. And the more you can collaborate, I think, and the more you can bring in other views and be open to those views and challenge yourself, you still may end up at the same place, but you're having a good discussion. And without it, you're not really going to have innovation. You're going to keep doing the same things that you've always been doing. So it's a tough one. It's a real tough one that really takes conscious effort and a lot of teamwork to open up and to look at what are some different ways of looking at this. So it kind of gets back to challenging our paradigms again.
Totally. It's all about challenging yourself because you want to be better, right? Whatever better is for you. Many people want to experience their definition of success. So you got to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is another question. I'm really curious about this one, and we kind of touched upon it, but let's just dig a little deeper. How does establishing and building professional relationships demonstrate emotional intelligence?
So it's about,
because it's intentional, right?
Yeah, it's being intentional, and I think that goes to there's a study on LinkedIn that just came out this last week, saying by 2020, there's going to be 42 million freelancers across the United States. So people are becoming freelancers or becoming more self-employed, and they're not really interested in going back to the traditional work space. And I touch upon that particular statistic because whether you're a freelancer or whether you're working for a company, it's kind of the same thing. It's all about client relationships, internally or externally, right, from an organization. Mm-hmm. It's about connection. It's about networking. It's all about interpersonal skills. The days of, someone working in a job or a role where they're just sitting in a cube doing their thing all day long and never interacting with someone are completely over. Everything, whether you're a business for yourself or you're working for someone else, it's all about interpersonal relationships. It's all about connection. It's all about networking. It's all about collaboration. Many companies, I'm from Chicago, right? I'm in the Chicago area. McDonald's, home of McDonald's, like McDonald's, GE. So a lot of these other companies now are going to what they're calling Project Pelotons, or there's some other terms out there, where it's these teams come together and leverage one another's strengths and then they separate. So it's like you really don't have a home base. It's just this constant evolving, forming of teams for a project, and then the project dissipates, and then you go on to another team. And so it really requires people to be self-directed and these self-managed teams, and to be able to form these relationships and form them quickly and efficiently and effectively. And so whether you're networking within your own organization, whether you're networking externally, whether you're a freelancer networking, everything is about relationships. And even at the broadest organizational sense, it's about an organization, a company, a corporation, a non-for-profit having that relationship with their customers. So it's all about networking. And it goes back to, again, understanding emotionally that empathy component, right? So that empathy component, and how do I connect in so that we've got win-win relationships going on.
Win-win is everything. It's what often people strive for, which means you need to be flexible.
Yes.
Flexibility is everything. Okay, so they need to be flexible. We all know that you need to be flexible for various reasons, but then when you're driving change, flexibility is key. So, Susan, when should emotional intelligence be considered when you need to be flexible when you're driving change?
At the beginning, the middle, and at the end. I talked a little bit about habits, right? Mm-hmm. We're all humans, and as human beings in our brains seek habit, our neural pathways in our brain, even if it's something that's not working for us, there's comfort in going back to our old habits. That's why it's so hard. I'm speaking for myself here, to like diet or exercise or whatever with the best of intentions. It's like, why do we backslide sometimes on goals? Because especially under stress or when things get tough, change is tough, right? Or when we're being asked to change, do things differently, we go back to habit because it's just what's comfortable for our brain. Our brains are hardwired that way. So it's very important throughout change to understand that and to build a unifying message and a unifying understanding. So whether you're leading the change or whether you're being impacted by the change, it's recognizing that, I hate to use the word empathy again, but that's really what it goes down to. It's that unifying message of how is this impacting people, and how do we build the energy for everyone to commit to the change. And that comes from being able to message and really have that understanding, that interpersonal connection. Because again, people, they attach their hearts and their minds to emotion. So we could say all day long, we need this change, and here's all the data, and here's all the numbers behind it, why this is a good thing. And they might remember some of that, and logically, they might get that. But what's really going to motivate an entire organization around change, or an entire team around change, is the meaning behind the details. So when it comes to change, we have to think meaning first, then detail. And it's repeating that meaning. And so anyone who's led change knows, we're always saying you have to repeat it, repeat, communicate. Because what you're really communicating isn't the detail as much as it is the meaning behind this change. And having people understand and having their brains, right, their hearts and their minds tune into what's that emotional component behind it. So it's very important when it comes to leading the change. And then sustaining it afterwards, because it's all about the commitment piece.
The commitment. Yes, the commitment is everything. Keeping your word, meaning what you say, saying what you mean, accountability, all that snazziness that makes it all work. Well, Susan, I appreciate you being a guest on the Career Tipper podcast. Please share your favorite quote and affirmation that keeps you creating career tripping moments.
Oh my goodness. There's a James Thurber quote that I'm probably going to butcher here, but the general essence of it is, it's better to fall on your face than lean too far backward.
I like it.
I don't know if that's really an emotional intelligence quote, but I think it's about always, taking some risk, going forward, stepping out ahead, that keeps me motivated, and I just try to find fun in everything I do. So, and bring fun to my clients and the different experiences that I have. So that's what keeps me going.
You're creating an experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Experience.
Yeah.
So totally. Please share how the listeners can get in touch with you, Susan.
Oh, yes, please. You can visit my website, which is www.theeicoach.com. You can email me anytime at susan@theeicoach.com, all spelled out. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I post some blogs and some articles there. I also repost from other great coaches and great thinkers, so it's a great place to pick up some tips. And I'm also on Twitter. So the EI Coach @coach_EI. You can follow me there. And that would be very exciting for me because I don't have that many followers yet. I'm being very transparent. I just started on Twitter, so I need some Twitter followers. But yeah, so LinkedIn, Twitter is great, where you can find me, or at my website.
Susan, I will follow you on Twitter now. I will log in and start following you. And you can find me, Michelle Beatty, at careertipper.com and on Instagram at careertipper. Be sure to stop by and sign up for our newsletter to find out about upcoming guests and amazing career tipping moments and tips. Listeners, thanks for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Career Tipper Podcast. We're grateful for our listeners and guests. For more resources about how to evolve to your professional best, share your comments and feedback about this episode and your suggestions for future guests, visit careertipper.com. Until next time, be confidently you.